Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to our viewers, our friends, and devotees from all around the world. This is another episode of Toward Authentic Dialogue. I'm your host, Yugal Kishore Das, alongside the creator and host, Bhakti Rasa. And today we have a very dear friend and sister, Rati Rupa, who's joining us all the way from New Zealand. And Rati Rupa has been part of the Bhakti culture since 2003 rather, over 20 years, part of our great family of Vaishnavas and devotees. And around 2007 and 2009, she began studying and practicing naturopathic medicine. And as of a few years ago, she has received training and is now an Ayurvedic practitioner. And it is with these concepts in our mind that we welcome her as a guest on today's episode to talk about what we can glean and gain from Ayurvedic practice and how that can assist us in our Bhakti Sadhana. So, Rati Rupa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to join you for a conversation. Also, just for me, it was enjoyable to dive deeper into some of these overlapping ideas between Ayurveda and looking at how it's I've not just learned about it in a medical or healthcare kind of way, but also how it's helped me as a devotee, as a bhakta. So that was quite an interesting exploration for me to do. So thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. So I thought, because I have no knowledge of who will be listening to this, I know my dear friend Patraka is listening, but others may not know so much about Ayurveda. So first, I'll just give a broad overview of that to sort of set the scene, put a bit of foundation down that we can move forward from. So Ayurveda is a medical system or a healthcare system, which is both for remedial medicine, so remedial being medicine that is designed to cure disease or treat disease, but also for preventative and longevity. So that's something which, although there is a lot of information on the internet, one can, Google anything and find out about anything. But in the wider mainstream healthcare model, there's not such a good preventative system of medicine in place. Something that's very robust and put forward even by doctors, or governments or whoever is going to push a medical system. So Ayurveda really thrives and excels in that department at how to prevent things from happening, or when something's starting, how to stop it from getting worse, how to stop it in its tracks, and how to get on top of something before it turns into a full-blown disease. So that there's a lot to be said about that part of Ayurveda. But what I wanted to sort of touch on and discuss with you both and whoever else might join on is how the underlying philosophy of Ayurveda, being really aligned and coming out of the Sankhya system, which is a Vedic philosophy, but also yoga as well. Yoga as in not just the modern Western yoga version, but yoga as a philosophy itself, and how these two things, along with some other trains of thought, have combined together to create that give the foundation or the roots of the Ayurvedic system. So it's not just a healthcare system, but it's based on a whole philosophy and a whole understanding. And as we know, philosophy changes how you perceive the world, how you perceive yourself, how you think of everything. It changes the whole lens in which you view life. And that, as devotees or bhakti practitioners, we're always looking at or reviewing our lens on the world. And I've found my study of Ayurveda to be really complementary to how I perceive the world in bhakti. And also because my personal experience in my Bhakti yoga practice has not been very smooth or straightforward, and there's been a lot of rocky parts to it, as probably most of us have experienced. There's been a lot of downs and ups as well. And I, having reflected on that, know that a lot of that was born out of some imbalanced viewpoints. And some of those things come out of also, that's a whole discussion in itself. So, the reason why we have those imbalanced viewpoints is varied and many. But I find that expanding and broadening our view and our Vedic view can really bring some balance back to some of these more extreme ideas that we may carry with us. And especially in the early stages of our Bhakti practice, the tendency as a kanishta, and not to say that I'm further than a kanishta, but, as a kanishta, as Maharaj likes to call it, we might be very, very full of enthusiasm, quite absolute in our thinking, borderline fanatical or even full-blown fanatical at times, and bringing in some of these additional trains of thought or Vedic understanding can really help to bring in this balance and allow us to be more integrated, healthy, happy, complete human beings. And my personal experience has very much been that the more grounded and complete I feel as a devotee, the more that we feel sort of a natural spontaneity and enthusiasm toward our devotion. We feel it's not forced, it's not extrinsic, it becomes an intrinsic thing. It becomes alive in many ways in which it won't if it's being just forced upon us from outside. So so much to be said. So that is a bit of an introduction, but just speaking a little bit more about what Ayurveda is and some of those underlying philosophies, because obviously not all of us have knowledge of Sankhya or yoga. So probably the main foundation or the foundational ideas being that of the Pancha Mahabhutas. So the Pancha Mahabhutas being these primary gross elements of the world: earth, water, fire, air, and ether or space. And so looking at how these things are in everything, everywhere around us, and especially in our own human body. So they present in a variety of ways. Just one moment, I've got a lot of light shining in my eye here. And so that's the Agni principle there, the light. I'm going to have to fix that a bit. So how this comes up in a variety of ways for us. So it's everywhere, and we all have varying degrees or varying amounts of these elements in our body. And then if we take in further in the Sankhya system, so we hear that there are 24, sometimes 25 elements. So we've got these Pancha Mahabhutas. We also have the sense organs themselves, the sensory, the objects of the senses, so sound and sight, and smell, and taste and touch. And then bring all of these things together, and it's like looking at, these are kind of the gross components of the whole world that we live in, that we exist in. And if we have some understanding about those components, we can, not for our manipulation or overlording purposes, but we can learn how to cooperate and work and integrate ourselves into the world, and also cooperate with our own body, which often does things that are quite confusing or complicated, so that we can exist in a much more harmonious and happy manner, really. So one of the ways, for example, to take it from abstract to a bit more of a practical thing, is so taking those panchamahabhutas. So, for example, let's take earth, the quality of earth. And so we might not perceive that there's earth as in dirt or soil everywhere, but we use the idea of earth as a categorization for lots of qualities that we see in objects. So we might see something that is very dense. It's dense, it's stable, it's solid and inert, and it's not liable to move or transform. And therefore we say that is of an earth quality, that substance. It has a lot of earth within it. Or if we see, and then we can see that also too, we can see that physically in a human body. So some of the tissues of the human body are more earth dominant. They don't change so much. Things like bones or even skin, hard tissues, some soft tissues as well. But even in the subtle realm as well, in the realm of the mind and emotions, some people, and we'll say, we use these terms in our language, we'll say so and so is a salt of the earth person, because we see that that person has those qualities of stability, reliability. I would say my husband is very, very much like that, Balaram. He's a very salt of the earth kind of person. There's stability, there's forbearance, endurance, these kinds of qualities that you could extrapolate on from the quality of earth and say that this can be found even in the human mind. So there's not exactly like there's dirt in the human mind, but
Perhaps I
maybe
can
there is.
swap some air element for his earth.
Yes, so it's right. And how we complement each other and how the elements play together, and what can happen if you mix, like, you mix earth and water and you get mud. But you could also build a beautiful mud brick house out of some earth and water, for example. So, you take this sort of raw, very raw kind of philosophy. It's, in one sense, it's not super sophisticated. But when you start to really investigate and inquire into how this plays out in everything, and you sort of see it as the Lord's Lego system. We had a lot of Lego in our house. I have 2 children, or teenagers now, but Lego was a major facet of childhood for them. And that how, even the Lord has this Lego system going on. And if you know a bit about Lego, you know how to combine the parts appropriately. So then I can make a really amazing structure because I know how to utilize the parts properly. So it's a little bit like that. Yeah. So, yeah, I would add too that Ayurveda is really complete health system because it's not just dealing with physical ailments. It understands the integrated nature of the human body. So we have a body, as we talk about as Vaishnavas. We have a mind, we have senses, and we have spirit or soul, Atman. That concept, and this is where I would say, and just to make this disclaimer as well, that Ayurveda is not. I think we were discussing this yesterday a little bit in yesterday's Q&A about the overlap of different philosophies, and there was some discussion about Buddhism and taking ideas from other philosophies and how they can be assisting and supportive and helpful in our understanding. But there can be a line where we say, okay, and then at that point then it's different. And that's fine. That's no problem. And it's a wonderful place to exist in when we can say, oh, I like all those things, and that's really helpful. And then you're different, and I respect that. And that's actually glorious in its own right, that something can have all this overlap and then a different part. So Ayurveda, the idea of, because it's not really a philosophy about the spirit exactly. This is one of the things of the Saddarshans, is that the Saddarshans being the 6, and this is sort of a coined idea by, I don't think, original rishis and things, it's not their idea of sudarshanas. It's sort of a later imposition from probably Westerns, probably some Western influence. I don't know for certain. But anyway, it helps to kind of make the point that there's all these different ideas out there and philosophies, and how they have their strength and they have their area which they excel in. So Vedanta is very much about Purusha. We're talking about transcendence. We're talking about what the realm of spirit looks like, what all of this sort of detailed understanding. But then you take a philosophy like yoga, and yoga is really just a practical philosophy, how to meditate. What should you do before you meditate? You should do yamas and niyamas and asana and pranayama and pratyahara and these things. Then you should do meditation. And then your meditation will be enhanced from doing these preliminary things. And then if you really look into yoga, it's the description of what is beyond the physical realm is not super, super detailed. We just hear about the chitta vritti, nirodha, and, stilling the fluctuations of the mind and this kind of thing. But the detail about how to do your meditation is vast. And so as we're Gaudiya Vedantists, we can take some lessons from, for example, yoga, or what I'm talking about here is Ayurveda. We can take some of those lessons and then integrate them back into what we're doing. For example, like one way in which that's come up for myself, and I know many other devotees in the same position, learning some of these ideas about yoga and then applying them to our japa practice. And, for many years, I lived in a temple for many years, and we're having group japa. And, it's early in the morning, it's a bit tired, and so the mantras get a bit faded and not very well pronounced. And then you get up and you walk around, and it's not always, and I'm more speaking from my own personal experience, it's not always very meditative. It can be reciting, and it can be a bit mechanical at times, something we have to reel off, and, we've got an allocated amount to do and a time amount that we need to do it. But we take some of these ideas from yoga, and we can, and everyone has to do this in conjunction with their own gurus and their own background ideas too. So not that I'm overriding that, but we can take some of those ideas and bring them in. Oh, so it's good to sit with my spine straight. Okay, let me try that out. And if you do sit, and because you can kind of slump like this, and it actually changes your consciousness when you're slumping to when you sit upright. It can be quite a different to your alertness. And then if you go into the science behind that, and so I do, for example, I do quite a lot of Ayurvedic body work. And one of the things I do quite a lot of is head massage, which is just wonderful, wonderful thing. Everyone loves it. But people are often surprised when I'm doing it. They might come to my clinic for a head massage, and I say, so we do this seated. And they're like, oh, I was hoping to lie down. I thought it would be more relaxing lying down. But we do it seated because you get this polarity or this opposition of sort of this alertness of sitting upright, and then this deep relaxation of having your scalp rubbed, your head, your shoulders, your neck, so on. And where you can be aware of how relaxed you are, if that makes sense. Not this, because if you get very relaxed, I'm just going off on quite a long tangent here, but if you're very relaxed, then you may fall asleep. But if you're sitting upright, you still can fall asleep, and people do, but it usually doesn't last as long or go as deep. So you're able to be aware of the healing taking place of the sensation, for example. Yeah, taking that to another sphere again. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. I want to add one thing and then pass the ball right back to you. I recently read this Imli Tala small book that Radha Madhava Prabhu helped to translate and publish. And he mentions how Lord Chaitanya sits under the Imlatala tree, and he's in Siddhasana. He's in a yoga pose when he's doing this. And
Yeah, right.
that pose is there to assist the elevation of consciousness. In that case, for him to really enter into and meditate on Radha's mood.
Yeah, that's really nice example. Very nice example. Yeah. And I think I would go in the direction from there that at least in my early stages of practicing bhakti, there was sort of this idea that, and in fact, it's a very good idea, but it has to be appropriately applied, is that so long as I'm chanting Krishna's name, it doesn't matter how I do it and what I do. And, so long as that's at the core of what I'm doing, or there's no hard and fast rules for chanting that name, and we would recite that every day in the temple in our sadhana. And it's lovely. It's a wonderful thing to bear in mind because you feel less pressure from here. I don't have to do it in an exact way, but there's definitely things we can do like Sādhana, which can be really, really helpful. And I think I would speak for most devotees is that japa is something we could all use a little help with. So if if someone or something is offering some assistance with our japa, should be like, oh yes, please, can you give me some assistance with that, some support? I'll take it, because it's not something that comes naturally to most of us. So hence the value of these other systems of understanding and
Yes.
how to support it. And even Lord Chaitanya's doing it, so
Yes.
must be.
Yeah. Our
Yeah,
Bhakti Acharyas are borrowing from these other systems.
yeah,
That's such a beautiful thing about, Sanatana Dharma as a whole, the universality of Hindu thought,
yeah.
but then
Yes,
even
yes,
within these, sort of sectarian lineages, we're still constantly borrowing and giving back, and there's feedback, and yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
yeah, yep. And to it's tangible, it's noticeable that we can apply these things. Another example, this is just my personal practice, is that I do manasik japa, and that may not be for everybody, but manasik japa, it has a very different quality to it. It's very different, and that's come through the lineage in which I am now in my bhakti practice. But there's a way to approach our practice differently, and that might actually have slightly different result. It might be the outcome might be slightly different. So, yeah, another example of that.
Would you say something about what that is? I've never heard of that.
Okay, sure, sure. So manasik japas. So usually, at least when I was in ISKCON and after that as well, the idea was that your chanting is audible and that you're also liberating the beings around you with the sounds, the vibrations of the holy name, it has a lovely kind of sentiment to it. However, of course, we know that that depends somewhat on the purity of your chanting. And ultimately, as I understand it and how I see this as being helpful for myself at this point in my practice, is that I'm not actually here to liberate everyone else. I'm really just working on myself primarily. Um, and therefore, I chant silently. So manasik means within the mind, so that it's not on the tongue, on the lips. It's done within the mind. And the mantra is chanted silently. But yeah, so we still have our voice, but the voice is within the mind. Mm.
And that is how Bhaktivinoda Thakur practiced. He did silent japa, then whisper, and then loud. He would do all three
Okay.
during his
Mm. Mm.
I
It's
kind of saw
interesting.
that that evolution in my own self, and this was a very late stage, but you know, so many years of ISKCON and just kind of belted out, and then moving to a non-ISKCON um, ashram, and then it was like, oh, quietly, quietly, and then just last year I started actually finding the rhythm of chanting silently in my own mind.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I do like to play with those three different levels, as Bhakti Ras is
Yeah.
mentioning. And I think the word japa in Sanskrit literally means to mutter or utter.
Vata.
Japa.
That's my understanding. And I also point out too that, and if we have a sort of, dare I say it, sort of rajasic tendency of mind, we might try to hierarchize those things and say, oh, manasic is better than verbalized and I must do this. But that's not the case. It can have a different outcome, like I said, and it's not that one is better than the other. You wouldn't go on Sankirtan doing manasic kirtan. Be a disaster. So, you know, it's having the discernment to know what's appropriate at the right time. Yeah.
And also to know that it's not wrong. You know, we could think, oh, that person's not chanting out loud. They're not doing it properly. So there's a place of legitimacy for all three of those.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important too. And I mean, I where I live now, I'm not in a wider group of devotees. It's mostly just myself and my family and some nearby friends. But and again, another way, I'm just sort of expanding on what you're saying, Bhakti Rasa, that in a group setting, that there can be that tendency to look and at others and compare and judge. Hopefully, not so much, but that it does go on. It's the nature of the human mind. And then, but there was all the benefits of being in a group setting as well, and that we inspire and we encourage, and you know, people, you can flow along with someone else's enthusiasm, these kinds of things. But then again, being by yourself, there's benefits to that. Like I'd be more inclined to probably do my manasic japa, you know, in a more solitary kind of situation. But my main point being that tendency to not judge what other people are doing because you don't know exactly why they're doing it, perhaps, or maybe haven't got that expansion of understanding.
Yeah, and to not project what it would mean if I was doing it that way, to project that on.
Very much. Yeah.
I feel like
So
you may
should I?
want to change gears, and yet this is such fertile ground. I mean, what better to talk about in terms of sadhana in Ayurveda than japa itself? May I ask one more question?
Sure. Yeah, of
And
course.
this is to try to hit the Ayurvedic perspective. You just mentioned now environment and how an environment, different environments, those different styles of chanting might be best. What about the mental environment? What about someone with a rajasic tendency or a
Great question.
I don't know, a tendency towards lethargy or a tendency towards neuroticism? What would you recommend to those type of people in terms of their?
Yeah, fantastic exploration. I don't, you know, as the nature of the Q&A sessions, let's explore that idea a bit further. Yeah. So
But feel free to totally pause that if you want to just, you know, shelve that for the moment and carry on in the direction you had.
I think it's a great starting point for some other ideas as well. So the environment of the mind, I mean, even that's quite a cool concept to look into. And just give me one moment. I'm just going to change this blind a bit.
The zebra effect.
I remember Swami not so long ago with that same going on. So
Yeah.
good company.
That's the new, instead of the zebra, it's what's the new zebra stripes instead of the new.
From New Zealand, New Zebra. Yeah, so this environment of the mind, and I think as a starting point, and this is something I really love about Ayurveda, and is that Ayurveda is sort of starts, and this is what most people know about Ayurveda. They're like, oh, isn't that thing with the vata and the pitta and the kapha, and you know, you're going to tell me what I am? And people, I even love this. I love it. People are like, oh, tell me something about myself. I want to know. We should be the most qualified to know something about ourselves. We live with ourselves, you know, all the time. So hopefully that would be the case. But I love that it gives us a little bit more, a deeper understanding, at least about our physical and mental state. So we take the vata, pitta, kapha, and then of course we also take the tamas, the rajas, and the sattva as well, because that's as important as the vata, pitta, kapha, and sometimes a bit overlooked by some. But having some understanding of the vata and the pitta and the kapha, so just to give a little background on that. So these are the ways in which these elements that I talked about earlier, the Pancha Mahabhutas, so the earth, the water, fire, air, and space, they sort of have natural combinations in the world, and especially in human beings, where they will come together and they will more often be seen in particular combinations. So, and then we use the terms vata, pitta, and kapha to describe those sort of naturally occurring combinations. So vata, for example, is when you combine the air element and the space element, and you get this combination of factors which has a particular look, feel, you know, sense to it, basically. And so how that comes out physically and mentally is it's in lightness, it's in spaciousness, speed, movement, what else? Dryness. Yeah, dry, rough, subtle. These are the qualities of a vata. And when we talk about the environment of the mind, we may have more of a tendency in one, as a vata mind, for example, which has very much, which often shows up as a quality of movement. So a mind that moves a lot. And it can be a positive thing because we can be quite dynamic in thinking. I've got quite a vata mind myself. It can go in very non-linear directions too. So it can be quite good at bringing in out of the box thinking, or cohering, or is that a word? Bringing together ideas that you would previously not think would go together, for example. Whereas you have the pitta mind, or pitta type, or pitta combination is of fire and water. So you put those two things together, and probably the best way, and I find helpful to understand when you combine fire and water, because they seem like two opposing things. You put water on fire, and the fire's going to go out. But actually in the form of acid is one way which you can kind of understand how fire and water coexist. You get a liquidy substance which has this ability to perform transformation. So it's a transforming liquid. But it could also just be more like raw fire or raw water, purely like that. So that might come out in the mind. You see something that has a very transformative ability, or very penetrating, like acid. Acid has the ability to penetrate or what's the term? You know, break things down a lot. And this comes up in the human mind. Somebody that's might be super analytical, very super focused, able to penetrate into a thought or an idea very deeply, and able to give it full focus without sort of this dispersion. And then the kapha is this combination of earth and water. So that can show up in the body and in the mind, like I talked about earlier, some of these earth qualities like stability, being solid, dense, Also, things like coolness, softness can be there, despite the fact that usually density is hard, but it can be soft. That's like a water quality, things that are soft. There can be some liquid there, but usually more in a dense state. But these have the qualities. If you extrapolate, you go to the next stage of looking at something that's gross, it has these qualities. And then in the human mind, it may be somebody who's really, really good at having stamina, like mental stamina, not somebody who takes up a project and then gets bored with it and gives it up. They see something through to the end. They're not motivated by like initial excitement that wears off and goes through. However, all of these things have a positive and a negative. Negative's never fully negative, as we know, but they have a thing that might be more challenging, let's say. They're not negative. Something that we might have to contend and deal with over time. So the challenge of the kapha might be because there's not this sort of light, uplifting sense. You think about earth, it's something that sinks, it's heavy, it goes down. There might be a tendency to some melancholy there, or some depression, or sort of like a low level of mood at times. Not feeling really enthusiastic, even if you don't want to go that low. It might just be, they might take a bit to get kick-started, for example. So then taking it back to your original point, you're going to prove that, if you know that that's your mentality, say I'm a bit more like that in my mind, I might need to do something before I do my japa to kind of like kickstart things a bit, to get to like break up the density, to get me moving a bit. And maybe that's like some sort of exercise. Maybe first you need to do some jumping jacks, or go for a walk up a hill, or do some pranayama. And actually, I probably shouldn't say it, but I see my husband does this because he's got this he's more of the kapha mentality. Often we live on top of a hill, so he'll walk up the hill, get the breath rate up, or he does some pranayama, some quick breathing, which is quite enlivening, invigorating, and then do his japa. So because it helps to kind of, like pep us up, get us moving, invigorated a bit. Whereas if we know that, so this is about self-knowledge, knowing what our tendency is. If we know that I'm going to sit down in my japa, I'm going to think about everything in the three worlds. Oh boy, I'll think about everything, and things I didn't even know that were in my mind, they will come up, everything. And if you know that's the case, then probably it would be helpful to preempt the japa with something that's like, I like doing some pranayama. So pranayama is really helpful. I can talk a bit more about that in a moment. So you can do pranayama in a way that is invigorating, or in a way that is calming. And it's just breathing. It's just breathing. It's so simple. And it's a tool that we all have, and there's no cost or resources required. They're already inbuilt into us and right there available. So some deep, and there's one method of doing it. You can either do what's called box breathing, or a 5-8 ratio, these kinds of things, which they bring us more into what we would call a parasympathetic nervous system state. So which is more calm, it's more settled. We're actually taking these qualities that the kapha person might have excessively, and we're trying to implant them into ourselves to stop the racing of the mind, to stop it from ping, 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 like it might do, to go all over the place. There may be other things. Sometimes, for example, I make myself a nice hot milk before I chant my japa, because hot milk has certain amino acids in it that are very helpful for helping us feel calm. This is why, the age-old saying, at least in ISKCON, was, you read Krishna book with a hot milk to feel good, just to really feel good about things. So, that might be the case. That you need
cold milk, though, because you know what happens with cold milk.
Oh yes, disaster. That's an Ayurvedic emergency.
Especially for men, beware of cold milk.
Oh, okay. I'm not aware of that.
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's not good.
So yeah.
It seems like what
Yeah.
you're saying, Rati Rupa Prabhu, is it's all about balance.
Yes.
All about balance.
Perfect.
And
Yep.
and that seems to be, I mean, I've heard that as defined as to what health is. Health is something where everything is in balance. So, our nature is basically we we have to work on being whole. Like we have certain particular tendencies, and we need to make that whole in a conscious way by adding those things, that will complement our
That
need to make it.
brilliantly summarizes it, I would say. Yeah. And that is really the essence of health. And I would take this back to this idea. And although I shy away from the idea of sort of the Kanishta, the Madhyama, and the Uttama Adhikari, because I don't like to make such a judgment of where I stand in my bhakti practice. But however, for the sake of making a relationship with what you're saying, is that as we progress, hopefully one of the symptoms of that is that we find ourselves more balanced in our bhakti practice, more able, all the things that we aspire for of tolerance and humility, they all, my insight or understanding is that they kind of naturally arise when we are in balance. We're more able to tolerate others because we have already achieved sort of a balanced state ourselves where that becomes easier for us to exhibit those other bhakti qualities that are essential for our sadhana. So
Yeah.
I go ahead.
I was just going to say it makes sense on all levels, because if we don't have that wholeness and that balance, then we are off kilter, and our aim is not going to be straight. Where it is we want to go, we're going to miss the mark more than we are in balance.
That's a
If we're
great
in
point.
balance, our aim will stand a better chance. If we're off
Yeah, right.
balance, we're more likely to go off target.
Fantastic point. You could even take that to the point of archery, right? How many points have to be balanced
Yeah.
to actually hit the target, right? Yeah, wonderful point. Yeah, and I would put that there's one concept that comes up in yoga and Ayurveda naturally because they overlap, called spanda, spanda, which I'm sorry, that's probably the New Zealand accent. They're brutalizing the word, but it being that everything exists on a spectrum, and that we have so many overlapping. Yeah, thank you, spanda. So all these things we have: hot and cold, and dark and light, and solid, and what's the opposite of solid? Is sparse. All these things. There's all these spectrums that are existing within us, mentally, physically, and all these different levels of our being, and that we're always trying to come back to this central balance point. So coming away from the extreme ends of the spectrum, pulling it back to center. This is where and it might, we might have slightly different points for each of us where we have our balance, but the idea being the same thing, is we're pulling away from extreme ends and coming to this sort of neutral middle ground, or this centered point where we find the balance. And so when we're in Ayurvedic medicine, that's one of the main things that you're looking at when you're dealing with a disease state, is you're looking at, is there some sort of deficiency here, or is there an excess? And they call it kashaya and vriddhi. And this is, kashaya is like the deficient state. Is there something missing? Is there something that's
stopping me from coming back to this balanced state? Is there something that needs to be added to the system here? And then in the opposite, it might be there's something in excess here. There's something that needs to be removed. And so we were talking just before we started about the panchakarma method, the Ayurvedic method of detox or cleansing or undergoing this whole procedure. And that would be assessed as that, is there some deficiency in this person? Is there something we need to add to help them come back to their balance point? Or is there something in excess here and we need to remove it out of the body? It can be a bit of both, and usually it is a bit of both. And I find this is one of the ways in which Ayurveda is really supportive, is just to have this kind of model that we can reflect back on ourselves, do the self-examination. Am I missing something here? Or have I taken that too far? Maybe I've taken it too far. Maybe I'm doing that too much. And where do I bring myself back to my center point? And this is where you get the different types, is that the different types or doshas, and I use that term loosely because we're all of them. We're all got all of these elements in us, but we may have a tendency to go off balance in one direction repeatedly. And that's when we would say, oh, that's a vata type. We tend to be too light, maybe, or we tend to move too much in our thoughts or something. That's my tendency. That's sort of my fault, because the very word dosha sometimes translates towards fault. And it's more like, this is my personal challenge that I have to deal with. This is where I might need to continually bring myself back to my balance point. Is like we're saying, my mind's always busy at japa time. Therefore, I'll make a practice of doing something that supports my balance. And that's going to be different for different people. Yeah.
Almost take that as like default.
Yeah, that's right. And that we integrate that. And then this becomes something that is favorable for my bhakti. It's favorable for me to do that because I know about myself. I know what I'm like. Me as in my physical, mental body, which we are in essence, basically, while we exist in this human form. This is what we identify with primarily. Of course, this is another place I find a bit of imbalance exists, is that we can go too far, and I'll come to that in a minute because I think that's a really good point to investigate. But, I need to know about me and my physical and mental me. I need to know who I am, because if I can work with that, I'm able to support even my spiritual practice, which is beyond that. I need to know what my instrument is. I need to know how to sharpen that tool, or I need to have, these things are really supportive in enabling us individually to know where we can make supports. Because sometimes there's sort of the one size fits all approach. And there's a place for that. There's definitely a place. And, as we know, at times gone by, that when there was mass surge of people coming into ashrams and this sort of thing, for practicality and necessity, you might just have to say, okay, everybody, this is what we do. This applies to everyone. But I would guess that all of
army.
us, yeah, right. From the Navy, right? It's probably very much, I don't care for your individuality. This is just how we do it. Bang, 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 bang. But my experience and observation has been that over time, we may need to start like that. And then over time, as we reflect more and we get to know ourselves more and we get more familiar with the practice itself, that we have not just the ability to adapt, but the allowance, hopefully the environment around us allows us to adapt, and that we allow ourselves to adapt, because there can sometimes the rigidity of ideas can be too strong, and we don't allow ourselves to break. Some of the rigidity, just for a point there, is more of a pitta kind of quality, a trait. We get very fixed on this sort of sharp pointed focus. It must be like this. This is the only way it could be. And no, we have to make some allowance that it could be a different way. Maybe I need to approach this quite differently. Maybe this is not one single way of doing it. Yeah.
It's very radically personal. And the necessity to customize our practice, our approach, the philosophy, according to our nature is basically what you're speaking of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether it's physical, mental, emotional,
Yeah.
to allow ourselves, because that is the process of individuation.
Mm.
We experience that in our human development. It's like I've come to think that we're in an eternal adolescence. We're just constantly individuating from where we are,
Mm.
and that
Yeah.
to allow ourselves to customize and yeah, to be radically personal in the knowledge of ourself.
Yep. Yep. And not sort of the factory model of spirituality, where we all go on the factory line and come out the same sort of way. And I mean, this is just my extension of my own thinking, is like, there's a reason that we're all so individual and that we all have unique, despite there having been billions and billions of human beings, at least within our model of time, that every person is different. It's just an amazing phenomenon. It's so cool, actually, when you really deeply consider that and that will go on for eternity, that we're all different and that it won't work exactly the same for each person, and there has to be some room for an individual shift. And in one sense, it's like, when I kind of, this started to dawn on me in my practice, what a sense of freedom there was. Oh gosh, this thing which battling with perhaps, and we might have that thing we battle with. It depends what it is. It might be something that's quite crucial and upholding pillar of the Bhakti practice, and we may need to just approach it differently. But there may be some other things that we just go, wow, that thing, I need to shelve that and not, that's not a big part of my practice anymore. And other things that we can bring in from seemingly other traditions or something like this, and that becomes an integrated part of it. So that's been a common thing that I've heard in our Q&A discussions about people bringing in things that are supportive to them and kind of getting this validation that, is it okay for this thing to help to support me? Is that all right? Yes, it's good. Do it. Yeah, keep it up. We need all we can get, really, that's my point of view.
And it's kind of like you asking, is it okay if I bring this part of kapha into my, pitta lifestyle? It's just a natural. It can be, and it should be a natural and organic way to bring about balance.
Yeah.
What is it
Yeah.
that I'm lacking? What is it that I have excess of? And
Yeah.
wherever I find that, then that's appropriate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's another point which I find helpful is sort of respecting the body's natural intelligence to make those calls.
Good one. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think this came up actually yesterday's Q&A, and somebody was asking about how, I'm being told these things as sort of an overlay or an imposition on my thinking, but yet I'm feeling like this. I'm having these feelings, but it's not matching what I'm being told. And whilst Ayurveda might seem like an overlay, or any other system could be like an overlay, I find more that it matches what I feel. And therefore, that's been a good match for me. And it's, probably not for so many people. But the main point being that this ability to tune into ourselves and say, hey, I'm getting a signal from my body, mind, senses, feelings, emotions, there's some signal going on, and having this innate trust in that, because unfortunately, this was my experience, very much one of my initial teachings in my devotional life was to not trust my own body and mind and senses. And that was kind of disastrous, I have to say. And a lot of the further time from that was kind of coming back to this point where I can trust myself. just like take a really simple example. Say it's a hot day, right? It's hot, the temperature's high, the sun's shining. In New Zealand, the sun is really intense. It's not a really hot place, but the sun burns very fast.
What's
And then
the
you,
elevation where you are in the South Island?
oh, not very high. I'm quite
No.
close to the ocean. In fact, I can see the ocean out my window.
It has something to do with the big hole in the ozone, maybe.
That's right. That's what people say. Yeah. But on a hot day, we have this innate intelligence. Oh, I should go in the shade. I should put a hat on. I should drink a cold drink. I should have a juicy fruit, right? This is
Nah,
like, yeah, no, someone told me on YouTube or the internet that I should go against that. And, this is better for my health to actually have a hot drink and get in a sauna. And we're like, hold on, that doesn't feel right for me. And there are exceptions to every rule, of course. But generally speaking, we go, no, that doesn't feel right. And if we can, to some extent, even just a small extent, tune into that and go, okay, this doesn't feel right, then this is sort of the beginning when we can start to make these adjustments and these adaptations to how we do things. Because it's not usually so straightforward as it's a hot day and I need a cold drink. It's usually quite a lot more complex than that. But these are some of the most basic, even Ayurvedic ideas is like, it's cold, put on a jacket and a hat, cover your neck, wear a scarf, have a hot drink, have a soup. It's just really practical, really practical. And then we do it and we're like, oh, I wanted to do that anyway. It feels really good. I like that. And so, and then sometimes, and this is one of the features of the modern world, is that we get told to go against those things.
yes.
And that can be quite damaging.
Yes.
Or even in the spiritual community, you might be told, but you're not supposed to feel good. Oh, you put on a hat and a scarf and now you feel good? Take that off. Something's wrong.
It's really awful.
Yes. Actually,
I have
there's a
point.
kind of related. There's a big question I've had on my mind for a few weeks, and in relation to Ayurveda and balance, maybe this would be a nice time to offer that up.
I just disclaimer, I'm not a medical doctor.
Sure.
I'm an
Yeah.
Ayurvedic doctor. I don't offer medical advice, but
And it's more of a question of philosophy than it is cure,
Sure.
treatment, or something like that.
Yeah.
But the idea of pratyahara has been in my mind for a few weeks, of course, as the fifth of the 8 limbs of yoga, right? Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara.
Yep.
And pratyahara, funny enough, a few weeks ago when I asked Swami about, my bags being lost and this, he mentioned, I think Rupa Goswami mentions atyahara. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Atyahara, pratyahara, these are clearly very related words. So commonly translated as withdrawing the senses to be able to focus on that object of meditation. And yet you were saying, let's say in terms of japa, in terms of our sadhana practice, different strokes for different folks. What is my mental constitution? What is my environment? I might need to balance those factors so that I can actually enter into a sustainable sort of practice. And I don't know if I'll use this word correctly, but the idea of tantra and engaging the senses with their sense objects. So are these not also on that bipolarity of withdrawing the senses entirely, this kind of old school mentality of give it all up, none of it's real, the essence is within or something. And then the reaction, of course, being no, gratify, engage completely, put it all on. So, what would you say in terms of how does Ayurveda does it use Tantra philosophy at all as an aspect of yoga philosophy? Like, let's say I was told this many years ago, you're having difficulty chanting, there's these posters of the names. You can literally look at the names and read them. That's engaging the senses. You know,
Yep.
you could be surrounded by Krishna art. That's engaging the senses. You could have the sound of some melody, you know, in the background to your chanting. That's engaging more of the senses. You might be standing on the ground with bare feet. That's engaging your senses. So when is it useful? When is it not useful? Or, you know, what is that middle point between
Mm.
engaging and withdrawing?
Yep. Yeah. I think this was even raised yesterday as well, this point that ours is not a process of renunciation, and that renunciation is a byproduct of bhakti, and then it's appropriate renunciation. But that would be like a bhakti answer. But then bringing it into sort of the Ayurveda yoga model. And of course, what I'm going to say is I'll just preface it by saying that I really see how it can bring balance. And I think of it more in terms of chakras, actually. So chakras, that was probably been the hardest thing for my own mind to accept, because I have quite a long background of seeing people doing chakra healing and you know, kind of thinking, oh gosh, that's really new agey. I'm not sure I can digest that one. But having explored it a bit more and kind of really understanding the underlying philosophy of chakras, and hear me out on this one, can understand that this is another model or another system. And however, I don't know the exact source in yogic philosophy. It may be more of a tantric thing, perhaps. But how this can be exactly what you're asking, how it can sort of balance this idea of manifesting this earthly sensual kind of dynamic and this transcendent renouncing upward thing. So in the chakra, we probably have some idea of chakras, that these are like plexuses or very strong energy centers within the body, and there's 7 of them. And you could kind of think of them like light bulbs, maybe with different colors or this sort of thing. And then there's an energy current that flows up and down the channel. And this is what the Kundalini is like, this energy current flowing through these light bulbs. And the lights, they can be, like we were talking about, excess and deficiency. They can be too much on or not on enough. But the main point that I'll get at here is that this energy current, we have like an up energy current of transcendence, of going beyond, of arising out of the physical body, of, and even like before we get to that point, even it's like abstract thought, intellectualization, this kind of stuff. And we know this, how it translates in Bhagavad Gita, these sorts of things, these ideas. But we have to have the descending current also. And this is my observation, just personal observation, is that often we start our bhakti practice with, not everybody, but often, with too much of this. We're going upward, right? We're on the way up. Let's shoot through the roof and go to the heavens. That's the direction we're heading in. And then we get these other things, that the downsides of an extreme or too much in one direction. And then we bring it back into balance with some of this stuff. So like, I'm having trouble concentrating, for example. Maybe I need to look at a picture of the Maha Mantra. I need to ground myself. I need to bring it back into something that is really tangible, because another way that polarity exists is tangible, intangible. If I'm sort of existing in this intangible realm, can't make sense of anything, it's just a swirl of ideas, and I'm feeling very ungrounded, and I ground and I bring it back down.
Embodied.
So, yeah, embodiment. And because I'm not this body, I want to get out of this body. I'm not this body. Maybe we should be our body for a bit, sometimes, at least. I mean, maybe that we have to be our body, actually. we do. We have to learn to live with it, and we have to learn to function it. We have to learn its particular personality traits and idiosyncrasies of our particular body. So what I'm saying is basically just finding the balance. And we know, having practiced Bhakti, that it's not one way or the other, and we have to balance when I think about this, because this kind of can be this idea, I find it summed up perfectly in the Indian head wobble. And this might be getting a little too abstract, because yes and no is a kind of polarity, right? We say yes and no. But what if I just tilt my head on a diagonal? What does that mean? It's yes and no. We don't know
Maybe.
what it could. Maybe, as you like. We see it in India, they're like, whatever you like. If that's what you want, okay. But I'll wobble in all directions. So and this is the viveka, the discernment, the intelligence, and I find that sharpened by employing some of these ideas for myself. This is just me speaking from personal experience, and that may be a different experience for others.
What I've kind of
Thank you.
seen, and I'm probably going to not explain this very well because I don't have a clear picture myself, but you were speaking earlier about spectrums. So I think that there's more to it than just finding the center point on a continuum. That there is a way that there's in spiritual life that there's something that I'm not afraid to use the word transcend because it's so overused and misunderstood, but something that is higher than the continuum itself that brings both of those qualities into a spiritual experience where it's related in context of spirituality, where it's not just left just on the human continuum between hot and cold, where we find what's warm for us, but somehow then take that warmness in the context of bhakti. And then that kind of absolutizes it takes that mundane experience and puts it in a different kind of context. I think there's more dimensions than to
in a single line
continuum than just this. There's this, but then there's also and we can see the chakras kind of as the rainbow bridge going between the spiritual and the physical, becoming more and more and more dense. So it's kind of like that. So there's like a continuum, yes, between hot and cold, but that warmth, where does that fit within this kind of continuum? To find the balance in both ways, to find where we can be steady in our practice and in the vertical continuum as well. How to draw, like you're saying, how to draw down that energy and how to, to find our balance in this way also.
Yeah, taking it from a two-dimensional principle to a multi-dimensional. Yes.
And as you were saying too, when you were speaking, Yuko Kishore, it's about the environment. And we can see too that just from this discussion, how it relates to scripture and how the author of the scripture, just as Ayurveda is meant to bring about balance, so as they put things into text and scripture in context, then the purpose of that is to bring about a balance. So it's very customized to a particular time and place and circumstance. It's a customized thing for those people that it's intended for. So
Yep.
it's said in a certain way. It is a certain thing is said, which might not have been said at another time or to another population. Just like an Ayurvedic prescription might be given, but it's to a certain person in a particular time, and that person at a certain time in their development, it's very, very customized. So
Yep.
you can see scripture like that also. It's not just a one size fits all kind of thing, but
Yep.
it's customized, and we also have to approach it in that way. How is this speaking to me?
So
Mm.
maybe I can try to morph that into a question back to Rati Rupa, because I hear what you're saying as, you know, that transcendental quality as from a Bhakti framework as being all about relationship, not just vertical, that I'm free from my own suffering, but a horizontal connection to others. So someone who struggles with connection to others, you know, um, what kind of practice, what kind of technique could Ayurveda offer to a person like that, where, you know, and I think in terms of the chakra system, the heart is number 4, right in the middle, right? If we're using that 7 chakra model, I've heard of others, 16, 14, 8, 6, but the heart is always in the middle, right between sky and the underworld or whatever, earth. Um, so what answers might Ayurveda, what not what solutions or what remedies might Ayurveda offer to someone who simply has really difficult time uh going beyond their own mind and connecting to others' minds and hearts? That's a
Okay.
big question, of course.
That's a big question.
Well,
And it
modern
might have,
medicine might say, you know, take this pill. You know,
yeah,
this will lower your defense system a little bit, and naturally you want to connect. And so many
yeah.
philosophers say that naturally the human is social. Even Marx, one of the greatest atheists of all time, said the human species is social and creative. And I've
Mm,
never dropped that. I've never let that go because it's so poignant and it's so true.
hmm
Um, we are
mm.
so I mean, you know, of course there's gonna of course maybe Ayurveda or maybe the different darshans offer different perspectives. But from your own bhakti experience, of course, and then with Ayurveda as a tool in your belt, how would you maybe guide someone that's struggling in that arena?
Well, of course, there's going to be a lot of individuation on and how you have to take a full assessment in order to give a thorough answer. But I would say if you took that, and we're talking about spectrums, and that is one part of a spectrum, and I would say that I would say that relating and relationships is not necessary, and this is just my opinion. I'm not taking this from any particular philosophical background or scripture. I would say it's not necessarily in the middle point of a spectrum, and that I would say we as human beings also have a need for not isolation but solitude at times. And we have this spectrum that we often use of introversion and extroversion, and we say I'm an extrovert, I'm an introvert, or I'm an ambivert, I'm somewhere in between. Some people will say that. I would say that if we're having struggle to relate, then we're looking at that again. There can be so many factors. It's actually quite a complex situation, and it can be as particular as a particular person's sanskaras and or traumas, for if you want to use the different terminology. It can be an imbalance in all sorts of manners. Yeah, basically what I'm saying is it would be quite individual, but I'm also, I'm this is a personal belief from lived experience, observation of others, and that we find the middle ground, and that even like I take my own time, and as a Bhakti practitioner, for example, like living in an ashram, where you're with people 24/7, like from the moment you wake up, there's a person waking you up often, or you're the person waking other people up. Right, whole morning program, you savor the whole everything, and then whatever you do in that situation, you're with people constantly, all the time. Some people thrive and other people don't. And that would depend a little bit on their natural proclivity. However, now I'm in quite an opposite situation. I have quite a lot of time by myself. I spend a lot of time by myself. And there are times when I miss those situations of the intense social time. And it really, I would say that in my particular case, I don't have like an underlying perhaps issue that needs to be resolved in order to harmonize the two things, because in some cases it might be that there's something actually an obstruction to bringing the relationship part of it back, right? And that's also a part of Ayurveda, looking at obstructions physically, mentally, emotionally. But does that make sense? It's a little bit vague, sorry, but
No, it
yeah.
does. I like that you bring out the point that even isolation can be a cure, you know. I would say that's true in the backdrop of the fact that on that immaterial level, everything is always in relation. It's just how we are relating.
Right. Yep. And that things have a individual existence, but often they exist to be able to relate to another thing. That's what you're saying. Am I correct?
That's beautiful. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So both are there, right? You have to have the individual existence, but then the relational existence.
I guess
And both.
part of the question was driven by, what is the use for individual health without the health of a society, without the health of a community? It seems kind of null and void. It's almost pointless. No one exists in a vacuum. So what for this health and longevity if together we aren't healthy and able to sustain?
I guess my immediate thought on that is sort of the woods and the what do you call forest and the trees kind of idea. And also going back to my naturopathic training, one thing in New Zealand, the native culture is the Māori culture, and they have a health philosophy, which is broad, but one idea from that is called I think it's whare tapu whā, which is like the 4 pillars of health. And that you are a member of a society, that's one aspect of you, but you also are a member of a family or smaller communities. You also have your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual self, and you're all of those things. So I think I sense maybe a little bit of looking at the broader society in which you exist, some frustration with that, perhaps, that how can I be my best self when others around me seem to be going in a totally different direction?
Sure.
But maybe we look at ourselves, I think we're getting some freezing there, but look at ourselves, and perhaps in all the different environments in which we exist, and that's just one of them, and that we have other places, our small community, our sangha, all these places. Maybe I can associate myself or identify myself more with that environment, that community, and bounce off the health of the people in that community more so.
And God himself is community.
That's a lovely point. That the ultimate community, the overarching community of all communities and societies and environments, the substrate of all of the others. Yeah. So what a wonderful, very ultimate idea to bring into it.
Yeah, and the relationship between the individual and the community. They're in the same thing, the relationship between the individual and God. It's like we can not have love for God until there is, not necessarily until, but as there is also love for the self. If we have, we can't have one without the other. It's really not possible.
Yeah.
Because we exist as this in wholeness and in embeddedness. So health of the individual without the health of the community, health of the community without the individual, it also doesn't exist.
Yep. And then a community exists of many individuals. So although it may be a large community and you might feel a bit insignificant within that, but it always pays. And that's usually this idea of my sphere of influence, what I can change, that's me, and let me work on that primarily. And that was how I will instigate change in others, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing. The more we become individualized and individuated, the more we are a part of a community. It seems
Paradoxical.
paradoxical. It's opposite, but it actually it is true. The more I become myself, the more I become community.
Yes.
Yep.
Karl Marx. Yes.
I don't know his ticket. So
Sorry, I'll wave that flag because I mean, anyway,
I would say
different conversation.
I'm coming more from a Jungian perspective than I don't know.
Sure.
But that, our value as we will become valuable to the community just simply by being ourselves. It's not that I have to become myself and then do something in the community, but simply by being ourselves, that is the service to community, because becoming myself is actualizing my relationship with God, and that is the highest service that we can offer to our community. So
very nice.
So all of this, what you're talking about, Ayurveda, it's all the process of individuation. It's about recognizing our uniqueness, our unique needs, not over idealizing things, not stigmatizing, but acceptance, embracing who we are as whole beings.
Yep. It's so important. So, and if some of the ways in which that shows up, perhaps in when we absolutize or we idealize particular things, like this was certainly in my ashram days, that there were, take the gunas, the tamas, rajas, and sattva, with this over idealization of sattva and this sort of condemnation of tamas and rajas, and not saying that no, there's an employment for these things. They're necessary parts of God's creation. They play a role. That my daughter was asking me yesterday, she's like, mushrooms. I mean, mushrooms as a tamasic object, right? Like, she thinks they're the most revolting, disgusting things. But they play a role, right? They're decomposers. Just for example, or if a human being doesn't have enough tamas in its being, because it's trying to become more sattvic in this sort of unhealthy way of approaching it, that might mean we don't get enough sleep, and then we just become tamasic anyway, right? If we don't employ the tamas in our sleep, like appropriate tamasic time, rest, like the downtime, the real down, the low time, the sleep, I'm switched off, I'm inert, unconscious. If I don't employ that, it will just flow into the rest of my life anyway. So let me embrace it. I need some tamas. I need some rajas too. And as something my husband and I have talked about a lot, and that sattva is, although we have all the things that we associate with sattva, but sometimes what sattva is just like the correct balance and employment of rajas and tamas. and seeing that, oh, this is sattvic for me to sleep. I need a bit more. Or this is sattvic for me to get into gear and do something action oriented here, or think bigger or something like that. Yeah. So
the true way of relating to both energies, right? Isn't sattva just truth?
Yeah, truth. And I would understand that, and being truth is in the acceptance of the way things are, that this is what it is. It is that. And I don't fight it. I don't disregard it. I say, oh, it is that. I need tamas. It's there. It's there in nature. It's there everywhere. But I know how to balance and work with it.
I, for one, am taking this as a call to action. I need some more tamas in my life. I just had a lot of rajas exploring some areas in Peru, and now it's time for some rest and rejuvenation.
Good call. Good call.
So maybe now is a good time to open it up. We have one guest who is live here and have a suspicion that he might not turn on his camera, but he is welcome to, and ask any questions.
Yes, you're right. Hello, everybody. I'm not turning my camera on today, but I'm just here because I'm a big fan of Rati Rupa. So that's my main reason.
Excellent.
Because she
all
helps
little flag
us
out
with her Ayurveda powders and tinctures and mixtures. So it's all appreciated, especially through winter time. Yes, so thank you everybody very much. I really enjoyed it. It was a great conversation, yeah. I wish I had more of anything to add to, of any value, but I don't. So I appreciate what you all did. Thank you.
Well, your presence here is participation, so thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here.
All right, do you have any other parting words or something you would...
I do, actually. Something that I feel is probably it's really relevant to my individuation, let's say, and it may be helpful to others depending on where they're at and their own individual requirements. But one final concept in Ayurveda, and we all know a little bit about this because it is touted within devotional groups, is that of ojas. And this will relate back to what you're asking. You're going to prove that, because ojas is like, I heard first about ojas as a thing that was meant to be attained by celibacy, and that would be something that would be able to be channeled as sort of this mystical substance into the brain, and it would make us more equipped for scriptural study and tapasya, basically. That was how I was first told about ojas. It's not really the full understanding. And the reason I want to bring this up is because personally, and this is, again, like I said, just really related to my own lived experience, was that this overemphasis on the transcendent, the renunciation, the upward, the tapasya, the harsh, the heavy, these kinds of qualities. And ojas is this substance which is like soft and the subtle essence which brings us resilience and joy, contentment, immunity, all these wonderful things which we all like want in our lives, right? And a lot of this harshness and this sort of thing, it sort of destroys the ojas. It erases it. And I found for myself as a practitioner, after some time getting to this point where I felt like utterly depleted, really at a low point. And the way that ojas comes back in is like healthy relationships where there's give and take and there's support and loving exchanges and all these sorts of things that there. It's in joy, doing things that bring us joy, and that can be even laughter, having good company, these kinds of things. And the reason I stress it is because at least in my experience, this was a place where there was so much imbalance as a devotee. It was a dried up, cold, dark, harsh thing. And it was just savor. It was basically another word for slavery. I'm sorry, this is a bit extreme, but it was very much the experience that I lived. And then you bring in some of these things, and then you go, oh no, it can be wonderful, joyful. And this is Bhagavad Gita 101, is that it should be joyfully performed. And you see how this element of joy, I feel, and this is just opinion, but I really feel like joy is so important spiritually as well. And what better offering can we make to Krishna than, our joy? Krishna being like the God of loving and joyful mischief. If we offer that, I feel that's a really wonderful thing. And of course, that's opinion, but felt experience as well.
So beautiful, Rati. It's beautiful and necessary, and I totally agree. Yeah.
Your opinion.
Yeah, that's so, and it is so missed, and it is like the elixir. Joy is like the elixir of love, really. And
yes, perfect.
Like the juice of love, and it flows through our body also, and we can see how many devotees suffer long-term health issues and depletions.
Yeah.
Where they're what is it when you're completely depleted of energy? I can't think of the term right now, but like they've been going, their cortisol has been going, their adrenaline has been going. And it's like the life
burnout.
Burnout. It's like what's supposed to flow. Joy is meant to flow between the cells of our body, and this is what we get to offer. Our joyful self. And I fully agree, and I am so thankful and that I have a joyful life now. And
that's wonderful. Yeah.
I always like that.
Yep. Yeah. Very wonderful. Yeah. So may there be joy and bhakti. And I didn't start with an invocation, but I'd like to say one to end with, perhaps. So I feel like it's very on point with what we've just been discussing.
Please.
Svasti astu vishvasya kala prasidatam dayantu bhutani shivam mitodya manashchabadram bhajatad adhokshajay avishyatam no matirapyahoitiki. So may there be happiness, may there be, I don't have a direct translation, but may all beings be happy in their pursuit of love for God, basically, in their savor, and may there be all auspiciousness for everybody by finding their balance. That's my addition to that, finding their balance and enabling them to feel joy and the bliss of perceiving God in their life and perceiving Krishna. Yeah. So
beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that a lot.
Until we meet again, I feel like this conversation definitely could be further explicated.
Yeah, that would be cool. Yep, very nice.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.